G'day, it's Bruce here from Suzuki Garage. I've got my GSXR 750 in the background here. I'll show you that shortly. I had an issue the other day where I was riding down the motorway, pulled up, do a bit of moto gymkhana, and my mates were like, "What's that coming out the bottom of your bike?" And there was unfortunately oil pouring out of the bottom of the water pump. So couldn't diagnose it on the day. Had a bit of a search online, and this is a very common problem with the GSXR 750, is that water pump has a number of seals in it, and a mechanical seal and an oil seal and a water seal and so on the inner and the outer shafts, and those seals periodically fail, and the oil starts to pour out the bottom of your basically pours out your sump through that hole. So I've been trying to solve that problem now. I was thinking initially, after looking on the forums, that it'd be nice to buy a second-hand pump or buy an aftermarket pump. Unfortunately, I'm down on time. I have like about 4 weeks left in New Zealand, so I simply don't have time to wait for another pump. So I decided to rebuild the pump against all the advice on the forums, knowing that it's quite a difficult job to do. And now I thought I'd make a video on it, because all the videos that I've seen online on this just don't get to the point fast enough, and they just basically waste your time. With the pump itself, what you have is you have a shaft that goes through from the back side of the pump, and it comes through obviously on the front side. This goes through a number of seals. Goes through a number of seals on the inside of here. I'll show you those seals in a minute. What typically happens with these with this shaft is that a bit of moisture gets on the back side of this shaft, and it creates a little bit of surface rust on this. This one's not too bad, but they can get a little bit of scoring and pitting on there, and then that rust basically eventually destroys the oil seal on the inside of this pump. The oil seal's on the inside of here, and then the oil leaks out of the weep hole on the bottom of here. The oil comes out here. Sometimes oil comes out of here, sometimes oil and water comes out of here, depending on which seals have failed. It's common for both the seals to fail at the same time, and you have your oil mixed with water and so on. This is the back of the water pump. This is the bit that fits into the engine. This is the O-ring that sits around over the shaft there. So that holds the oil, stops the oil from coming out, but obviously the oil can flow into the middle of the shaft, and then there's a number of seals which sit on the inside of here, which I'll show you now. Okay, so these are the two seals that go on the inside. This is the oil seal. This is the one that failed on my bike. These ones are pretty torn up now because I've had to pull them out, but they wouldn't normally be obviously as torn up as that. But they get old. This one feels, it doesn't feel real rubbery anymore. It's kind of lost its lost its its elasticity basically. So that's the oil seal that sits at the back, and this is what they call the mechanical seal. This is pretty damaged now because I've had to try to pull it out. This has like a Loctite compound on the back of it, and then it has this other piece which sits on the inside of there normally, but that shaft's too damaged to put that back on there. So that's sitting behind that, and these are all sitting behind the impeller, and the impeller's sitting on the top of this with the shaft coming through from this side. And all of the stuff is extremely difficult to remove. This is difficult to remove because it's got all this Loctite kind of stuff on the back side of it, and it's just locked in there. It's mechanically locked in there. Suzuki asks you to use a puller to get this out. This one you could just be able to push it out easily, but that one definitely you can't push it out. And I'll show you how I got this out, and I'll show you how I got the shaft and the impeller off in a second, because there are difficult ways to do this, and there's an easy way to do this. And everybody that I've seen so far doing this have done this a really difficult way when they haven't had the tool to remove it. This is the impeller that sits inside the water pump. This impeller also has another seal on it, which is this seal here that sits on the inside of there. And this is pretty easy to remove. You need to clean all this stuff up once you remove it all, because it all gets pretty grimy in there. This is supposed to just lift off the shaft. I'll show you how that works. So that's the shaft that sits on the end of there, through that housing with all the bearings and everything on it, and it has a bolt on the top of there, which also has another what they call a sealing washer, which it looks like a washer with like an RTV kind of silicone kind of compound on the back of it. And the idea is that when you undo that bolt and you take that washer off, you should just be able to lift this off. The reality of this is that this has probably been on there for so long that you cannot lift this off. You can't get it off. It's really difficult to get it off. So you can see the screw here. This is the screw that's got like the the sealing compound on the back of it, special washer, one-use washer, the bolt, and it's got a little washer behind it as well, and that screws into the top of there. And what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to get that impeller off. So what I did is I placed this in a vise so that the bottom of it was supported, screwed the screw in a little bit of the way, and then got a rubber mallet and just a tool on the end of this, and just smacked the end of that until this shaft was physically pushed through, and then I was able to pop this impeller off. So getting that part off, it was a little bit of work. It wasn't real hard, but it was a little bit of work to get that off. That's by far the easiest way. So in a vise or in something where you can, a couple of bits of water on each side of it, doesn't matter how you do it, you've got to hold that steady, bang that off. To undo this, people are talking about holding the impeller. I wouldn't recommend holding the impeller. You can easily damage these blades. If you damage this impeller, you need another pump. Put a screwdriver, flathead screwdriver through the back side of it. So if you put a flathead screwdriver through the back of that, like that, on a bench, and get a ratchet on the end of that, you can easily undo this. This is not done up super tight. This is pretty easy to undo, but I wouldn't recommend holding the impeller to do it. The slots there, this is like a hardened steel. This is a far better way to do it. At least I think this is a far better way to do it. So once you get that off and you remove the shaft, you're faced with basically a bearing behind there and this assembly, which is pushed into there under force. And getting that out without a tool is just really hard. I've seen people banging this out with screwdrivers, putting screwdrivers on the back of here. If you damage that surface, that mating surface on the inside of there, or if you damage the surface inside here, you will not be able to seal this. You will not be able to seal the water and stuff in here. So it's really important that you don't damage that surface. So if you start putting screwdrivers in the back of here and trying to bang this thing out, the chances of damaging the surface are probably fairly high. And remember that this has got this blue Loctite type of stuff on there as well, so that's actually physically holding this in there. So what you do to get this out, and this is how I got it out, what you do to get it out is you need to have a concrete Dynabolt. So the idea of these Dynabolts is that they have like a tapered end on them, which you can see there, and then it has like these veins, and as you do this bolt up, this physically expands. And what I found is that a 10 millimeter diameter by 30 millimeter length bolt, I think it's an M10 this, fits perfectly inside that hole. It perfectly fits in there. Like, pulled it out a little bit, but that fits perfectly into the center, especially if you haven't damaged it. I already damaged mine trying to pull it out with a pair of pliers, which is one of the recommended ways to do it. It just does not work. You'll tear this to bits trying to get it out like that. It'll be a disaster. But a Dynabolt fits smack bang like through the center of the an M10 Dynabolt. And then what you can do when this is still in the pump is you've got the pump there like that. So basically what you're going to be presented with when you've got it is you're going to be presented with this setup where you're going to put your Dynabolt in the center. You've got your mechanical seal which is pressed into this, which you can't get out. Now because it's got that blue Loctite, and I'll show you on the new one how that looks. Okay, once this is in there for good. Well, not for good, but for a long time. And it's sealed. You have to loosen that stuff up, and what I did, I've just got a cheap heat gun here. Get a heat gun, get your heat gun in here. You go around, you heat this up. You've got to get it pretty hot. I had this on the hottest setting. I had it on there for about 2 or 3 minutes until it was really pretty much smoking hot. You don't want to overheat the aluminium because you don't want to weaken it, but hot enough so it's hot. And the idea is that you're going to melt that. You're going to melt that Loctite that's in the centre there. You're going to kind of loosen that up. So you get your Dynabolt in there. You tighten your Dynabolt up so it's not floating around all over the place. You need a couple of big washers. There's spacers. You put a washer over each side. Ideally, if you've got the right size hole in here, which I don't. Normally that Dynabolt will be pushed down further inside there. You put a couple of washers over the top, so it's spaced up the right amount. So just the M10 washers over the top. You put your bolt on to your Dynabolt. You start to screw this whole arrangement down, and as you tighten that down, that Dynabolt's going to pull up really nice on the center of this, and you'll be able to pull this bearing out, and you'll be able to pull it out really easily. Like about 20 turns on that, 20 turns on the end of that thread. Add a couple more washers, 20 turns on the end of the thread, add a few more washers, you pull that baby out. And that's it done. That's this job done. And that's just a matter of just reassembling the thing. And reassembly is, well, I would hope that it's going to be a whole lot easier. I think it's probably still going to be a slight problem, but it shouldn't be as bad as what it was getting it apart when we put it back together. So for cleaning this up, for cleaning this whole arrangement up, what I use usually is just a little bit of like a Scotch-Brite pad, because it's quite light in the metal. You don't want to score the metal or anything. I just want to make sure there's no sealing compound or anything left inside this thing. You've got to sort of inspect this a little bit, make sure there's no scores or anything on the inside of any of these holes. If there's any scores or anything inside there, then it's going to be, you're not going to be able to seal it again. It's really important that all the surfaces are all good and they're all clean. Just using like a solvent to kind of clean out any old grease. Okay, so we've got the new mechanical seal in here. We've got the oil seal underneath. Had a little bit of a drama because when I pulled this out, I couldn't tell which way around this oil seal went inside here, whether it went that way or whether it went that way up inside the pump. It turns out it goes that way inside the pump. The way to remember is that the writing goes towards the mechanical seal, so that side should be up. And that to be the downside towards the bottom of the shaft or the bottom of the pump. Getting this mechanical seal in here is difficult. So first, to get this in there, actually it is a little bit difficult to press in. It took me a little while to figure out how to do this. So what you do with this is you basically want a socket that's basically the same size as this, which I've got here. It's not a 10mm socket in diameter. It just needs to be the same diameter basically as or slightly smaller than the actual seal itself. And what you can do then is you put your pump into a vise, and you can just use your fingers basically to just press evenly down on that socket until you press that seal down inside the pump body. It's got to be seated down deep enough so that it's kind of sitting down there. You'll see there's like a little lip. It's got to be kind of on below that lip level. And then what you can do is I just put the body of the pump into the vise just a little bit, just so I could sort of push the seal on a little bit. You won't be able to push it down, you need far more force in that, but it's just enough to sort of make it sit there so it wouldn't fall out. Then what I did is I got myself a 24mm socket which had an end basically that's just a little bit larger, like the seal, the old seal body. You can tell because if you get the old seal body, it sits inside there quite nicely. That's perfect for sitting over the top of this seal when it's got the mechanical parts on it, which are these bits here. They have to be able to sit inside that socket. You can't squash them. If you squash them, you're going to have a problem. So basically what you want is you want a socket that seal can fit inside of. You get it started on there. You line that up by eye, put it in your vise, start winding your vise up, and just go slowly, wind it up, have a look, make sure it's going in evenly, wind it up again, make sure it's going evenly. It took me about 3 tries to sort of push this in all the way, and it's now fully seated in there, ready to go. So that's pretty much that's the main hassle part of the pump rebuilt. The rest of it now should be fairly straightforward because it's just a matter of screwing the impeller on and putting the sealing washers and things like that onto it. So we'll do that now. So we use a little bit of grease here just inside the. Oh, sorry, that's the other thing. Yeah, use grease, just a little bit of grease in all the bearings. Try not to get your grease around your mechanical seal where the Loctite kind of stuff is, where that blue kind of sealant is. You don't want to have grease all over that, but you want a little bit on the edges because you want to be able to press it down into there under quite a bit of force, and you want it to go in there evenly. So this is the other seal. I'll put a little bit of grease on the outside lip of that as well. The reason you want to just oil these lips up on these things is you don't want to damage the lip as you press it, and if you damage the lip then you've damaged the seal, then you're going to have a water leak or an oil leak or something like that. We don't want no water leaks or oil leaks. Press it in. That just presses in there really lightly. So that's in there now. We've got our mechanical seal in there. We've got our impeller seal, we've got our oil seal, next thing to do is to get the shaft in there. So you're going to put your washer onto the shaft. The shaft needs to be really nicely cleaned up. You don't want any gunk or anything on the shaft. If you have any gunk on the shaft, you're going to have problems. Everything in this job needs to be clean, needs to be good. I will grease the shaft up a little bit too. So you could use a little bit of engine oil on this if you wanted to, but grease is good as well. It's fine. So that'll just help make sure that we don't damage the seal as we start to put this thing back together. So we've got our washer on there, and we'll gently go up through the centre of the seals. Right, yeah, it's gone up there pretty good now. Now we're kind of ready to get this thing done up. Grease on the end of there. Okay, it's not looking like I can finish this job today because we need to install a thread lock on here that's not high strength, and I've only got high strength thread lock here, so we'll continue this job tomorrow. But that's basically the job done. It's just a matter now of just putting a new seal on here, cleaning this up, putting the whole thing back together, and we should be back in action. Oh, and of course putting the seal on the back of here, the O-ring seal, which is also important. You need to replace this. These things just get flattened out and become useless. That's that on there. So this job's pretty much almost ready to go now. I'll just put it aside.